Hello and welcome. Welcome to the second edition of Movin'On Inside. It's a pleasure to be with you today. So what's on our show today? Doing more, doing better, and doing it now. There are more than 1 billion cars on the road. So how can we decarbonize them? To what extent can they be recycled? Movin'On partners are active and engaged. We will discover some of the initiatives being developed by our partners in the recycle community of interest. As with all sustainable mobility challenges, Movin'On Inside has taken up the issue, done some on-the-ground reporting, and invited leading specialists on the set. Energy efficiency, recycling, optimizing usage, rare metals, no topic will be off limits. So let's dive in. It's time for the expert debate. Joining us, I will introduce them in a couple of seconds. But first this, with more than 1 billion cars on the road, the goal of decarbonization is ambitious with multiple routes to get there. What avenues should we pursue and what results can we achieve? To explore one of today's most pressing mobility issues, I'm pleased to have with me around this table today, we have Arnaud Gauffier, the Director of Conservation, WWF France. We have Ludovic, Leguem, Communication and Public Affairs Acting Director, BMW Group. And last but not least, Jean-Philippe, Hermine, the Senior Mobility Expert at Iddri. Hello to all three of you. How are you?
Hello. Right. Very good.
Right, so it's great. So it's time really to get to the heart of the matter. And before hearing what our experts have to say about challenges of decarbonizing the existing fleet, let's get some more content.
The automotive industry is undergoing a revolution driven by a clear overriding goal: achieving carbon neutrality for vehicles by 2035. Today, there are more than 1 billion cars on the road. Together, they represent 21% of carbon emissions from global transport. The challenge is therefore finding ways to reduce the environmental footprint of our existing vehicle fleet. There are already many incentives to accelerate fleet renewal, conversion and ecological bonuses, banning older vehicles on the road, and promoting electric cars. Changing existing cars for cleaner alternatives may seem like the ideal solution. However, there are certain realities to consider if we want to move to a 100% zero-emission fleet by 2035. Firstly, the average vehicle age is nearly 12 years. Early replacement is not necessarily an option for everyone. Secondly, there are vehicles and vehicles. To respect regulations and reduce their impact on the planet, many manufacturers have improved the environment performance of their combustion engine vehicles. Finally, if the fleet were completely renewed, recycling end-of-life vehicles would still pose an environmental problem. Shouldn't we therefore also consider how to extend the life of our existing vehicles?
Well, what are the realities of renewing our existing car fleet or extending its lifespan? So I'm going to ask the question to you guys. It's great to have you on the set here. So my first question, conversion bonuses. We've seen banning older vehicles from circulating and promoting electric cars. Everything seems to suggest that today public authorities have made their choice. What is your opinion? What do you think? Anyway, this question goes for all three of you. Who wants to start?
I can start. First of all, I think before thinking about renewing the existing cars, we should try to shift towards more active transportation modes. Mm-hmm. Instead of using cars, we should shift towards public transportation, foot, bicycles, for example. We are investing today billions in supporting the shift towards electric vehicles. We are investing 50 million euros in France per year to support cycling. So why not putting more efforts on supporting cycling rather than putting everything on shifting towards electric cars? So the first thing is sobriety. Instead of using individual cars, use public transportation and shift towards more active transportation modes. But we still have a problem since we have existing cars on the roads that are emitting a lot of greenhouse gases emissions.
Absolutely.
And we must do something with them. Today, private cars are accounting for 16% of global GHG emissions in France. So how can we shift? How can we shift towards more efficient and less emitting cars? We have a set of tools for this. For example, low emission zones should be better implemented in France, especially in cities. And we also must continue to support the shift towards electric cars, especially for the poorer households. Who today, these households today cannot afford to pay for an electric car.
Yeah, so that's interesting viewpoint. So I will turn now to our manufacturers. So probably, Ludovic, you work for BMW and doesn't need any introduction. This brand, everybody knows it. So you've heard Arnaud on the topic. What's your viewpoint?
I would like to get back to your questions. There are measures implemented today, but there are three kinds of issues we shall look at. First one is about local pollution, and it's about emitting pollutants. And the measures you described are about reducing local pollution, just like low emission zones as well. There are another set of measures which were not mentioned. It's about global warming. So for this topic, it's mainly about CO2, reducing CO2 emissions. And here as well, there are a lot of discussions and also decisions. If you think about WLTP protocol, RDE, but also Fit for 55, the rollout of electric cars, those are also strong.
Lots of sets of policies that have been set up to go in that direction.
Exactly. And in this, but from my perspective, there's still a lot to do, because this is only focusing about what's happening in the tailpipe. But this is not all about the tailpipe. It's also about what's happening before, how much raw materials we extract from the planet, how much we consume when we produce, and how do we recycle. So this is also something very important we have to take into account. And for that, we are really pushing hard to have this entire life cycle taken into account in the decisions. And last but not least, also there's bans. Yes, bans is one thing, but also incentivizing people is another thing. And we can also get very good results by incentivizing people.
Which sometimes can be more effective.
And can be more effective. So, for instance, we have a technology called eDrive Zone. It's not about a regulation. No one talks about it, but we have implemented a technology that allows our drivers, when they have a PHEV car, so a plug-in hybrid car, to go through the city without any emission, because the engine immediately and automatically gets off. And another possibility is to propose or to offer points for those drivers to ensure they are really charging the cars. PHEV cars, we know, unfortunately, are not charged sufficiently. And with our incentivizing program, we could have 75% of our drivers charging the cars. It makes a big difference.
Fantastic. We'll dig deeper later on. Jean-Philippe, your viewpoint on this question.
Well, your question is around the fact that authorities have made a decision, have made choices already regarding
which is great.
The way, which is great, to my opinion as well, which is necessary. I mean, imagine that they wouldn't have done that, just express an ambition, which is decarbonizing the mobility without a framework, a regulatory framework, a fiscal framework, an incentivization framework. I agree with my colleagues. I mean, we need multiple solutions, reducing kilometers, shifting modes towards softer modes, incentivizing people to change their purchase behavior towards new technologies, but also accompanying them in changing their usage mode, etc. So there are many things to do, and it's very good that the authorities have a vision, and that this vision is reflected into a regulation. We can discuss the pace, we can discuss even the technological choices, but it's good that the authority has an ambition, because we have to start from the beginning. What are we trying to do? I mean, we are trying to solve an issue which is gigantic, which is climate change, and we know that we have to, at least in this sector, the mobility sector, to find solutions to get towards neutrality.
Absolutely.
And we are lucky, we are fortunate, we have solutions, which is not the case for all consumer sectors, I would say. And here we have, on one hand, the reduction of kilometers, and that's absolutely necessary, but that will not be sufficient. We also have to organize some kind of technological shift, and this is difficult. Also, we have this technology, which is electrification. We also have hydrogen. This technology is recognized as providing huge benefit in terms of environment. We are fortunate because it's also a competitive technology. Already today, for most of the usage, we can find solutions that are competitive compared to traditional energy. But we know that this transformation carries some problems, industrial stresses, social issues, political crisis. We know about the Gilets jaunes, and we know where it's coming from. So this is related to transition, and this transition will be difficult. Therefore, it's important that the authorities organize this transition, force it, but in a clever way. What does it mean? It means that, first of all, it has to be holistic. As we mentioned, you see, many solutions are available. It has to be also comprehensive in a way that we can't have the car manufacturers providing the right vehicles, but not the infrastructure available.
But you have to work together for that.
Together. But this sharing of effort and this pace, the consistency of the pace has to be organized by the authorities. And on top of that, they have to be constant and provide long-term visibility. And that's the role of these regulations you are mentioning. You can discuss them, but they have to be there, and they have to provide to OEMs, economical players, consumers, territories that have to invest in infrastructure, the right path, and the orientation. That's absolutely necessary. And once the frame is there, then the OEMs, the car manufacturers, they can compete. It's a new frame for competition. That's it. It's just like Formula One, that you know very well. You have constraint, and within this constraint, you can compete. And now we see that most of OEMs have understood that that will be the new frame, and they want to get to be the leaders in that.
Right. So you wanted to add something?
Oh, yes. Sorry. No, but we're talking also about carbon neutrality. Techno neutrality or not, and that's a legitimate question. Should a regulation be neutral, or shouldn't it be not neutral? This is a theoretical question to me. We need this technological orientation because we cannot afford to have many types of infrastructures, a diversity of investment in terms of powertrain and energy, because that won't be the most efficient way to change the industry. Industry needs a return for investment, so it needs to be clear about what's going to be the solution. And it's also a way to organize some leadership at European level. So, to my opinion, to summarize, the legislator or the policymakers, they have to regulate and legislate, but they have to organize that on an holistic way. They have to accompany the change and prevent the social impact of it, but it is a good thing both for the industry and the environment.
Fantastic. That's a very clear answer. I will get back to what Arnaud said at the beginning. When we were speaking about cars that are already on the road, we saw it. So the lifespan is approximately like 12 years. So what can we do? Are there still ways to decarbonize, or what do we do with those cars? Is it too late? What can we do? Who wants to take it?
Well, I just want to make a correction. First, the lifespan of average lifespan of a vehicle is more like 18 years.
Okay, more than 12 years then.
Yeah, the age of the stock is 12 years approximately. But it's, I mean, the question is
The question, I mean, you have cars on the road that are for 18 years, but that's very old.
Yes.
But the average is 12 indeed.
The average
yes,
is
France.
12 indeed in France, right? Okay, so what can we do about those cars? What are the things that we can put in place? Is it too late for those cars? Oh, things you were talking about that, Arnaud.
No, we can retrofit some of these cars. We can convert them to electric vehicles, but the potential for this is quite limited. It is costly. If you take a small city car, for example, the price to retrofit it to an electric vehicle is almost the same price as buying a new car. So we clearly see that the potential for this is clearly limited. So the other way to do it is to invest in recycling. We clearly have to invest
There are new business models there.
Of course, we have to invest in recycling, and we have to shift from these old cars that are polluting a lot, that are causing a lot of problems in terms of climate, but also in terms of health. We didn't talk about health. Now, diesel cars in France are a major source of nitrogen oxide, which is causing a lot of problems for life expectancy for people living in cities.
Right.
So clearly we have to put these cars, I would say, in the bin, recycle them, and shift towards electric cars, but with less kilometers, less cars on the road, and shifting towards more active transportation.
That's also lots of energy consumption, so we have to think about how to make it the best way possible. If we look at, for example, what's the best way to look at it? Producing a new car or putting maintenance in an old one? I don't know. That's a real question. So at the end of the day, for the planet, if we have to, I'm not the expert, I don't have the data. What do you think?
Well, it depends. It depends of the consumer. It depends of the situation of each of us. And you know, so far we had to incentivize the beginning of a transition. So there were many incentives, bonuses, etc. And really they were towards the most agile people, the most wealthy people, so that they could initiate this transformation. But now we are going to move most of the population towards new technologies that are more expensive upfront from a cost of purchase standpoint. They are competitive after that, but anyway, this means that we have to organize the shift with some kind of social differentiation. Incentivization phase was directed towards some population. Now we have to identify the fragile population, the most impacted population from a professional standpoint, and offer them a system that will accompany their transition very specifically. So we have to reconsider the political instrumentation with this new approach. Now, to be more specific about your question, it makes sense for someone that drives very slow, very little, to keep its car and maintain it as long as possible, which is absolutely not the case for someone who drives it
every day and needs it a lot.
You have old cars which are very old with lots of emissions. Some of them are big and useless for the purpose of the user. So we have to consider more differentiation to accompany really the change, and the answer won't be the same for everyone, depending mainly on social demographical aspects.
Ludovic, do you agree?
Yes, that's a very, very good point from our perspective, especially, yes, getting back to these 12-year-old fleets.
Here, mostly in France or in Europe, because in Africa it's a different story.
Of course, but in the end, we have this fleet, and actually those cars have benefited from all Euro regulations. It means that within 30 years, we could decrease by around 90% or 95% depending on pollutants, and around 50% for CO2 emissions. So that's a lot, and there's more to come. We committed to 40% decrease in CO2 for the whole life cycle at BMW Group, and have it confirmed and measured by the SBTi. So it's a certification, and this is something which is mandatory for the future. Look at the whole life cycle. We'll get back to it later. And getting back to the fleet. One risk with higher and higher regulations, although it's better for the new cars, of course, is to have people not being able to purchase a new car because the price are getting higher. And then
that's a good question.
And what we fear is what we call Habana effect, where people can try to retain their cars as long as possible, although it's not very efficient or very clean anymore. Instead of being able or having the possibility to purchase a new one with lower emissions or lower impact.
Arnaud, you don't seem to agree.
Yeah, no, but I'd like to bounce back on this, and clearly it's a risk to put the electric cars for the wealthiest, and this shouldn't be the case in the coming years. But a way to make electric vehicles more affordable for people and for households is to reduce their weight. Now to build smaller cars. We clearly shouldn't make the same mistakes as we did on SUVs.
In the past,
on thermal cars.
But we're still manufacturing SUVs
and
even today.
We are manufacturing electric SUVs today. It causes many problems. First is a resource problem.
Of course.
They're huge. They need bigger batteries, so we will have a problem on rare metals in the near future. And also they are super costly. So one way to do this, to make this car more affordable, is to ask manufacturers to build smaller cars. That's a way to do it. And now, when we see what when we see what the manufacturers are offering today on the market, it's mainly SUVs.
Right. So probably doesn't make economic sense for the manufacturers to. What do you have to say?
Yes, I would like to give an answer. I agree on the direction. The direction being reducing impacts on materials. And getting back to your point, you have the same argument regarding the fleets that could be recycled. But actually, if we build cars today, we are able to think about recycling and reusing it. But the former cars, they were not, unfortunately, not made for that, and they are very difficult.
You mean the new generation of cars they were building today? There's cradle to cradle.
Yes,
is it something we're thinking about the whole recycle?
Today we are able at BMW Group to reuse 30% of the materials, and so in a car today you have 30% of reused material, which is amazing, but not sufficient. And the car you are seeing around us, it's a vision of what could be a premium car in around 2040, where 100% of materials can be recycled, and also 100% of materials are already recycled.
And this is what manufacturers are aiming at today, to be able to produce cars that are built out of 100% of recycled materials? From
my perspective, this is a top priority. We are aiming towards electromobility, which is a good step for reducing emission during usage. But if we want to have a look at the whole life cycle and the real footprints of the car industry, this is the direction where you can really look at what you extract from the planet. It also solves geopolitical issues, because if you don't need to extract or to buy materials from some countries, it's a good solution. So it's really a virtuous circle, right? Yeah. Circle, yes.
Absolutely. Jean-Philippe, you were smiling. You want to add something there?
Well, two comments on my colleague statements. Arnaud, you're saying that we should ask OEMs to build lower or smaller cars. It exists already in some countries. If you compare, for example, the fleet in Japan compared to China, they are totally different. In Japan, they are small. In China, they are huge, or in the US. And that's a matter of regulation again. It's not just asking for this type of material. It's because they implemented some kind of regulation.
Let's say demand and not ask.
So there are ways. And to answer to Ludovic to some extent about the cost and the price, Well, the problem today is that we have to switch fast, and it doesn't go well with the fact that we have to organize low emission zones, and that some very fragile population will be impacted by that, and they cannot afford electric cars because they are not second-hand cars or twice second-hand, so that they can become very affordable, but they will as well. So it's not a matter of electrification versus non-electrification. It's a matter of pace of transition, and once again supporting the most fragile people in their purchase or non-purchase, because they can share cars, they can lease cars. So there are new business models to invent.
Exactly.
To
vehicle as a service and things like that.
Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned something very, I think our time is up, but very briefly, you mentioned second car vehicles. What about that market? Is that market still relevant?
It's huge market in France. Actually, it's the biggest market. It's 80% of the market is about used cars. So there is a second life for the cars. And people themselves, they are making it longer, the life cycle of the car, and which is good. But at the moment, only cars, or mostly cars above 15 years old, are making the biggest share of the market. And this is an issue, and for sure we shall try to find solutions to make younger cars, not necessarily new, but younger, 5 years, being purchased by people.
Right. Arnaud, very briefly.
The average budget for an household, a French household, to buy a car is 6,000 euros. So you clearly see that they are turning to the second-hand market with,
which is more relevant to their
very
budget.
old cars. And my problem now, and to come back to the point I was mentioning, if you put on the market today mostly SUVs that are costing 50,000, 100,000 euros, what will these people buy in 5 or 10 years? If on the second-hand market, they only find cars that are still costing 20,000, 30,000 euros. So this is a real issue for the coming years. What we are putting on the market today is coming on the second-hand market in a few years. And if we don't have small cars, these people will not be able to afford them.
I think the message of Arnaud is quite loud and clear.
Yes, and that's right. And if we don't have electric cars, we don't have electric cars in the used car market neither in the next years. So that's a relevant point to see and try to orientate the support the demand towards the most positive or lower impact cars in the market.
Right. So that's pretty much all the time we have. I think the discussion is very exciting. We could go on for really forever. But just one quick word, maybe Jean-Philippe, just one final word, just to close on this question of decarbonizing the existing fleet. What would you like to say? Well, how do you see the future?
Well, we did not tackle very much the life cycle impact of a car, which is the new frontier. I would say we are going to solve, from a regulatory standpoint, the problem of electrification versus not. That means the problem of tailpipe emission, both CO2 and pollutants. But now, from that moment, we have to address the question of the energy efficiency of the vehicle,
Absolutely.
Size of the vehicle, weight of the vehicle, but not only the way it's produced, where it's produced, the energy intensity, the carbon intensity of the energy in the country it's produced. So it's another front that has to be opened by regulators, a new dialogue with all the stakeholders. But we have also now to address the fact that once we've solved the question of fossil fuel use in cars, we have to address the question of material, size, production way, etc.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Well, it's time to close the debate. What an exciting discussion in so many ways. And the full version will be available on the Moving On Connect website. So don't miss the opportunity to learn more. And thank you all for sharing your experiences today and views on the pressing challenge. One thing is sure, recycling is a key lever for reducing the environmental footprint of our cars. But what exactly happens to a car at the end of its life cycle? Where does it go? After years of good and loyal service, or maybe maybe an accident. Your car is a wreck, but a wreck that is packed full of resources. Under impetus of new legislation, end-of-life cars will increasingly be transformed into spare parts and recycled materials. This represents both a technical and economic challenge. To learn more about the process, our journalist Antoine Perrin set out to discover Resource by Iddri, one of the factories that recycles our cars. Let's head to Romorantin in France's Loire-et-Cher department.
C'est ici, dans l'usine Resource d'Iddri, un immense site de 30 000 m² que chaque année, près de 5 000 véhicules sont recyclés, soit près de 25 véhicules en fin de vie désassemblés par jour. Une véritable prouesse technique qui exige forcément un processus industriel ultra performant. C'est ce qu'on va découvrir. Nicolas Paquet, bonjour.
Bonjour, enchanté, bienvenue.
Merci beaucoup de nous recevoir ici. Donc vous êtes le directeur recherche et développement d'Iddri. Donc c'est ici que sont recyclés nos véhicules en fin de vie.
Effectivement, on reçoit des véhicules issus de l'assurance, des professionnels de l'automobile, mais également des particuliers. Alors, ceux qui sont issus de l'assurance, ça peut être des véhicules accidentés, incendiés ou inondés. Donc on accueille à peu près 5000 véhicules par année. Et donc, on a 25 salariés qui travaillent au recyclage de ces véhicules.
Alors, c'est quoi un processus de valorisation ?
Alors, tout d'abord, c'est une étape qui va concerner la dépollution du véhicule, puis le démantèlement de pièces qui vont aller soit pour le réemploi, soit être recyclées. Certaines pièces iront aussi en valorisation énergétique.
Et donc, la première étape de ce processus, c'est l'expertise. C'est ça, on regarde ce qu'on peut garder sur un véhicule.
Tout à fait, l'expertise, c'est exactement ça. Ça permet la traçabilité de la pièce et la qualification de la pièce qui pourra aller en réemploi.
Alors, allons voir comment ça fonctionne.
Allons-y. Donc nous voilà arrivés au poste expertise. Donc la première chose à faire, ça va être de scanner le code barre pour l'opérateur. Ensuite, sur son ordinateur, il va voir en fait l'ensemble des pièces qui ont un potentiel commercial via nos stocks ou via des demandes clients. Ça peut être une porte, un pare-choc, un phare, mais également une pièce mécanique. Pour les pièces fonctionnelles, on va tester la pièce en réel sur le véhicule. Sur les pièces de carrosserie ou d'esthétique, on va regarder si l'esthétique correspond à notre degré de qualité.
Et si c'est bien qualitatif, on la garde.
Ouais. On va la garder et elle va être commercialisée en réemploi.
Il y a une distinction quand même qu'il faut faire, vous êtes évidemment expert, entre le terme recyclage et le terme valorisation. C'est pas la même chose.
Non, effectivement, le recyclage, c'est le fait de prendre une matière et de la retransformer en un nouvel objet ou une pièce automobile, alors que la valorisation, c'est prendre cette matière et la transformer en combustible de substitution. Donc pour produire de l'énergie ou pour faire tourner un système d'industrie nécessitant de l'énergie.
Aujourd'hui, quelle est la part de recyclage et la part de valorisation ?
Alors le recyclage, réglementairement, c'est jusqu'à 85% de la masse du véhicule, alors que la valorisation énergétique, on a le droit de réaliser jusqu'à 10% de valorisation du véhicule.
Et donc justement, quand on parle de recyclage, on a envie d'aller juste à côté parce que c'est là que vous désossez vous complètement un véhicule. Et là donc, on est vraiment sur cette ligne de désassemblage.
C'est le début du processus, donc on va enlever les roues, les pare-boues pour la matière plastique. Ensuite, on va déposer les ouvrants du véhicule, également pour le réemploi. On va maintenant passer à la dépollution du véhicule. Donc on va retirer l'ensemble des fluides, tels que les huiles, le carburant. On va également enlever le liquide de refroidissement, le liquide de la glace. Et le véhicule va passer du statut de déchet dangereux à non dangereux en fait. Donc nous voici maintenant sur le poste de basculement et de retournement du véhicule qui va nous permettre d'enlever le moteur.
Et donc c'est là que se retrouve le moteur qui vient d'être enlevé de la voiture.
Effectivement. Et ce moteur va, lui, être déplacé vers une chaîne de démontage qui lui est propre pour valoriser l'ensemble des composants et des pièces qu'il constitue.
Parce que c'est ce qui a beaucoup de valeur en fait.
Effectivement, c'est ce qui a le plus de valeur financière dans le véhicule.
Même les pièces détachées.
Effectivement.
Et tout ce qui est pare-choc, plastique, ça devient quoi ?
Eh bien, ils vont être retraités et déchiquetés en dehors du bâtiment.
Ok, on va voir juste derrière.
On va voir.
Et donc c'est ici que va être scellé le sort des plastiques. C'est ça qu'on a pu récupérer.
Effectivement, pour les plastiques en polypropylène, on va venir les déchiqueter et séparer les matériaux ferreux des composants. On met à l'intérieur les matériaux au chariot élévateur et ensuite elle va broyer cette matière pour optimiser la logistique derrière également. Et donc voilà le polypropylène transformé en chips de plastique. Ça permet d'optimiser le transport et c'est une des étapes préalables au recyclage. Ensuite, cette matière va partir chez un préparateur de matière qui va la granuler et la laver. Et ensuite, elle va aller chez un compounder qui, lui, va faire le recyclage.
D'accord, et ça va redevenir peut-être un pare-choc de voiture.
Peut-être un pare-choc, une pièce intérieure ou tout autre objet, peut-être de la vie quotidienne.
Ici, grâce à ce processus de recyclage, plus de 97% de la masse d'une voiture est valorisée. Mais est-ce qu'on peut vraiment valoriser la totalité d'une voiture? Eh bien, c'est la question qu'on va poser à Olivier Godot, c'est le directeur du site. Olivier Godot, bonjour.
Oui, bonjour Antoine.
Merci beaucoup de nous recevoir ici dans votre usine.
Avec plaisir.
Donc, première question. Arriver à 100% de recyclage ou de valorisation, est-ce que c'est vraiment possible?
Techniquement parlant, je ne pense pas que ce soit réellement une difficulté. La vraie problématique, elle est économique, puisque on va déjà s'attarder sur les pièces détachées d'occasion. Vous avez compris que sans la pièce détachée d'occasion, la filière véhicule hors d'usage ne peut pas vivre. On va se focaliser sur ces matériaux-là et on travaille en termes de recherche et de développement sur justement des matériaux qui sont plus complexes.
C'est ça les 2-3% qui restent?
Oui, exactement.
C'est quoi ces matériaux? C'est plutôt du plastique?
Ce seront plutôt des matériaux, on va dire, organiques. C'est en fait des matières plastiques, certains caoutchoucs, certains textiles, des mousses qui sont fortement liés les uns aux autres et qui, de cette façon-là, en fait, deviennent très difficilement recyclables.
Ici, donc, l'usine Resource d'Indra a une importance assez particulière en Europe.
Oui, c'est clairement en fait un site unique en Europe, voire même dans le monde. C'est le seul endroit où une équipe d'ingénierie qui travaille sur à la fois l'éco-conception en vue du recyclage et l'optimisation du traitement fin de vie d'un véhicule est associée à un vrai site de démantèlement.
Ça semble primordial en fait que tous les acteurs qui participent au cycle de vie d'une voiture participent ensemble à penser à son recyclage en fait.
La filière française, la filière européenne, de la conception en fait à la fin de vie, a son avenir entre ses mains. Il faut qu'elle sache simplement travailler ensemble. Et c'est d'ailleurs la raison pour laquelle la communauté Movin'On s'est déplacée ici, chez nous, pour justement travailler un certain nombre de points qui aujourd'hui pose encore, il faut le dire, de vrais soucis en termes de recyclabilité et concrètement de recyclage.
L'un des défis actuels de la filière, c'est ce genre de pièce. Ça, c'est un bloc optique. À l'intérieur, il y a une dizaine de matières différentes. Il y a du plastique, du verre ou encore du métal. Le problème, c'est que ces matières sont entremêlées. Le challenge, c'est donc de les séparer pour enfin pouvoir recycler ce type de pièces.
Well, that was indeed very interesting and a great opportunity to discover behind the scenes of car recycling. And who better than the Recycling and Circular Economy Unit Manager at Renault Group, who is with me on the set, Jean-Denis Curt. Hello.
Hello.
It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
Right, so Jean-Denis, you are involved in Movin'On recycle community of interest. That's correct, right?
Correct.
And we've seen that some of the members had the opportunity to discover the resource plant from the inside. And you are acting collectively to address the challenges of preserving our resources. Your ecosystem-inspired innovation aligns with Movin'On vision and approach. This is what you're trying to do with the community of interest, if I understand. So through Indra, the Renault Group is quite committed actually to recycle end-of-life vehicles, which is great to hear, and you're working ever more closely with this ecosystem to address new solutions. Can you tell us a little bit about this collaboration?
Sure.
So Renault indeed is involved into the recycling of end-of-life vehicles through Indra, as you mentioned, also through Gaia, which is another dedicated subsidiary dedicated to circular economy and closed-loop recycling. We'll tell more about this later. And also another quite iconic project called Refactory, which consists of converting car assembly plant that is currently producing the Renault Zoe, the small electric vehicle. So the plant will be converted into a circular economy ecosystem. So it will not produce new cars anymore, but it will have a series of circular economy activities and collaborative activities such as reconditioning of used vehicles, recycling, retrofit, etc. And then, indeed, we want to develop recycling activities in this ecosystem. We will have a dismantling line like the one you saw at Indra, indeed, in Flins, in this refactory. But then, to develop this, we need a collaborative approach to foster the recycling of specific vehicle materials or specific parts that are currently difficult to recycle. This is why...
This is what we saw in the report,
yes, actually. So this is what this community provides us, the opportunity to have this kind of collaborative approach with suppliers, recyclers, chemical companies, material suppliers, startups, so that we will have all the blocks to close the loop of new parts or materials recycling.
Absolutely, and this is where we need to be headed. So what about thermoplastics in end-of-life vehicles? They aren't really recycled, are they? And maybe the work that what you've mentioned, I can see the work of the community of interest is quite ambitious indeed. So to what extent did this fit into the trends being set in motion by current and future regulations? We know that these regulations keep evolving and changing. What can you say about that?
So first of all, some of the plastics from the cars are recycled. Actually, there are around 150 kilograms of plastics in an end-of-life vehicle, maybe 200 kilograms in current vehicles that are put on the market now, today, will be recycled in 20 years. And there is a very wide diversity of plastics. So the most widely used is polypropylene. It's a very common plastic that you can use in
we saw it in the report. This is what they were talking about,
So this is the most recycled plastic from the car. Not all of it is recycled, but some of it. For instance, with Indra and this other subsidiary called Gaia, I mentioned, subsidiary of Renault, we are recycling bumpers of polypropylene to make new recycled polypropylene that is used to make new automotive parts. So this is done by dismantling the bumpers during the dismantling process. Some more materials, some polypropylene and a couple of more polymers are also recycled after shredding process in another recycling facility called the car shredder. But still, that is a minority of the overall amount of plastics of the car because there is a huge diversity of polymers. There are dozens of different types of polymers in the car and even hundreds of different qualities. For instance, just for polypropylene itself, there are maybe 50 or 60 different qualities for different vehicle applications. So it's difficult to separate these materials in a cost-effective way, and also have a very pure recyclate, a feedstock that we can use to produce very high-quality plastic materials for cars.
So I know that you are, the community of interest, of course, has developed 2 proofs of concepts for 2 different car parts. So what about that? Can you tell us more? Which members are involved?
Yes, first of all, which members are involved? So like I said, we want to close the loop. So we have all kinds of actors. We have automotive suppliers, such as Faurecia, Valeo. We have material suppliers like Solvay, Saint-Gobain. We have Michelin, a startup called Inex, a recycler called MTB. We have all kinds of actors to try to overcome all these challenges, to close the loops of these materials.
So it must be tough to work together with all of these people.
It's not tough. It's no. Each one we have complementary roles, and so roles. No, it's pleasant. There is a very good dynamic. Everyone was really thrilled by the visit Fantastic. At Indra resource that you saw in the report. Yes, indeed, we've gone through a collective reflection about what are some of the most difficult challenges to overcome in terms of vehicle recycling at the dismantling stage. I mean, starting from the dismantling stage, not shredding, but challenges that we believe we could overcome with the collective strength of the community. And so we identified 2 applications, so these 2 proof of concepts you mentioned, like
this, what we have here.
And rear lamps recycling.
Saw it in the report, by the way.
Yes, headlamps and rear lamp recycling, and also door panels. So you see, for instance, headlamp are commonly reused. So they are part of the circular economy because these are technical, costly parts that are often damaged in car crashes. So they as you saw, you can see on the screen, there can be headlamps that will be sold in the aftermarket for repair of cars, but they are difficult to recycle. So currently they are not commonly recycled because they contain a mix of materials. You see there is this transparent polycarbonate, there's metal, different kinds of plastics.
So what can we do to be able to recycle these kind of parts?
So we need to separate these materials. So part of it, maybe the polycarbonate will have to separate manually because if we want to do something with it, then it needs to be very pure and clean. But then the rest, we need to find mechanical ways of separating them. We cannot dismantle everything manually. That would be too costly. And then we need to find ways of separating these different kinds of plastics and metals mechanically by density, by different methods. And then for each polymer, each plastic, like polypropylene, like ABS, polycarbonate, then we need to find a recycling path, so a recycler that will be able to produce a recycled material out of it. And finally, we need to find applications for these recycled materials in the car.
Because you have a new raw material that you can use.
So that's another very difficult challenge because we have very demanding specifications, technical specifications in the car industry because for safety reasons, because the car lasts 20 years in all kinds of conditions. So we have very high technical standards, and so it's a big challenge to achieve these specifications with recycled materials that come from parts that have already lived 20 years.
20 years, indeed.
So this is why we need to work with our materials and parts supplier as well, like Faurecia, Valeo, because we can validate the recycled materials to be used in this kind of new headlamps for our cars, for instance.
Jean-Denis, you said it yourself, recycling has so much potential and we see it. So I imagine that you might also be interested in eco-designs.
Sure. So this was really the point, strong point of focus of the visit we made with the community at the resource site, where the Indra team showed how the cars are dismantled and what obstacles they encounter for the dismantling or the recycling of some parts that are too complex to recycle because the materials are too tightly linked together or mixed together, which makes them very difficult to separate and recycle. So yes, this fostered a really strong collective will of working into the eco-design, into how we could improve the design of automotive parts and cars altogether to make materials easier to separate and recycle.
Right. Well, thank you, Jean-Denis. It was a very exciting discussion about recycling, and we will follow this with very closely to see what's happening in the market in the future. Thank you very much for sharing. Well, if our discussions has cleared up your curiosity, you'd like to learn even more, and you can want to join this community of interest, you can, of course, discover the full version on the Moving On Connect website. As we just mentioned, recycling and resource conservation clearly go hand in hand in our drive to decarbonize the automotive sector. Now that we have a clearer vision of the challenges related to recycling plastics, let's now turn our attention to rare metals. And what a pleasure to welcome Guillaume Pitron, journalist, author, filmmaker, and rare metals expert. And he's with me on the set. Hello, Guillaume.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm very good, and you?
I'm great. I'm very excited to have this discussion with you today. I've read your book. So in 2018, you published The War on Rare Metals, The Hidden Side of Energy and Digital Transition. When do you have time to write?
Actually, that's my first job. I mean, that's my main occupation. So I find time to write from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Fantastic.
I can live on what I write.
You're
that's
lucky.
Good. I mean,
I never have time to write. I'm always impressed. So, Guillaume, to get back into our topic, so increasingly we're hearing a lot about challenges relating to rare earths and cobalt in hybrid and electric vehicles. So, do the same problem to affect combustion engine vehicles? I'm speaking about the existing fleet.
Actually, the existing fleet is also made of metals. If you take an oil car, you can find in an oil car manganese, you can find aluminium, steel, copper. You also find critical metals, which are so-called criticals because there are risks of supply shortages, which have been identified notably by the European Union. And you may find in an oil car a critical metal like magnesium, which is being used for making the seats of the car lighter. And you also find other critical minerals that are really specifically used for oil cars, notably in the catalytic converters. And in the catalytic converters, you will find metals like rhenium, rhodium, palladium, iridium, platinum. So as you can see, the rare metals and the critical metals issue is not only about hybrid and 100% electric, it's also, in a less extent, but still about all cars.
So we don't realize it. There are so many metals in the cars. We always think about plastic and other components. And surrounding the rare metals, there are some geopolitical stakes. So what are the stakes behind rare metals?
So you find rare metals in an oil car. I mean, for example, you may find them in wipers, in mirrors. It's small motors that are electric, and they use a couple of grams of rare earths in each of these electric components. You find also rare earths in the screens of a car, whether it's hybrid, electric, thermical car. You will find these rare earths in the colors of the screens. For example, you need europium for the red color. I think you will need terbium for the green color of the screens. And these rare earths are very strategic because they are being extracted in China. 60% of the extraction comes from China. 80 to 90% of the refining comes from China too. So what is being extracted outside of China goes to China for refining. And we are dependent, we Western countries, on the supplies, on resources which are extremely strategic
and
for many different usages.
So we were speaking about the existing fleet, obviously. So what's the impact of the trend towards all connected vehicles? What can you say about that?
Well, first I want to say that by 2025, we will find in the world 500 million connected cars. And every car today is connected in one way or another, every new car. Whether it's an oil car, whether it's a new...
Not just the new generation, you're saying.
Mostly the new generations, which are getting more and more, even
connected,
sometimes autonomous.
Yeah.
But, it doesn't make much a difference whether it's an electric car or a pure oil car. They will be, and they are more and more connected. But that means that you will have to get much more computers into the car to actually collect the data from the car itself and also connect the data from, surrounding cars, from connected bridges, connected roads, connected fire lights, in order to help the car to actually understand its environment. So these are more and more rare metals. Plus, this data which is being collected and received by the car, some of this data is getting actually stored in data centers, in servers outside of the car, in all this infrastructure that we call internet. And these servers need, rare metals. And for connecting the servers to the electric grid, you need fiber optic and you need copper cables. So there is no such thing as an autonomous car. The more you want an autonomous car, the more you need to make it actually dependent upon an infrastructure that's all around, which is made of these freaking metals. So we're never going to get out of it. Actually, the more we accelerate, the more we get modern,
that's interesting.
the more we need these resources.
So that's interesting. I'm going to take that word from you. There's no such thing as autonomous vehicle.
Exactly,
Actually, they need all those rare metals actually to become autonomous. This is something people don't know about.
The more it's dependent upon supplies and upon an infrastructure that.
And we're putting a lot of pressure then on those demands on those metals.
Well, definitely yes, but the International Energy Agency has calculated that for respecting the Paris agreements, by 2040, we're going to have to extract 42 times more lithium than what we extracted in 2020, and 7 times more rare earths. So, this post-carbon world is a metals world, is a metallic world, and we really need, in the general public, to get a sense of that.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't see that from that perspective, but we spoke about recycling earlier with our guest. So do the same recycling challenges like we discussed previously apply to these components?
Sure. So you will meet many recycling challenges with oil cars, obviously. For example, how do you recycle palladium? Palladium, which is once again this component of catalytic converters. But actually, palladium is an expensive metal, so it's more easy to recycle because it's competitive enough to have the secondary material recycled rather than the primary material which gets out of the mine. So today we recycle 60 to 70% of the world production of palladium. Then you may find lots of recycling challenges around the recycling of the component of an electric car battery, for example, and also the rare earth magnets of 90% of the electric cars running today in the world. That's going to be a very high challenge because you need to disalloy the alloy. You need to separate them. Have you ever tried to recycle a mayonnaise?
Not me, no.
You don't want to recycle a mayonnaise. You want to separate the egg from the olive oil from the salt. It's just impossible.
It's tough.
That's
Impossible
the
to
same
do that.
issue with a neodymium iron boron engine from an electric car. How do you disalloy these metals that have been mixed together?
Melted and mixed together.
You can make it, but expensive. It's time consuming. It's energy consuming. It's much less expensive to go back to the mine.
Interesting.
So for economic reasons, we have this challenge of making the secondary material as competitive as the primary material, and that's going to be a huge challenge for the coming decades in a post-oil world.
Wow. Guillaume, I would like to have a piece of your mind on one of the statements made by Thierry Breton. You heard the European Commissioner, who was really speaking about the north-south divide. So if we look at what's happening here in Europe, it's not very relevant what's happening elsewhere in the South in Africa, for example. What can you say about that?
Yeah, we keep having a perspective on the fact that we're going to stop selling oil cars in Western countries and Europe by 2025 for Norway, 2030, 35, 2040. But what Thierry Breton meant in the French Senate 2 weeks ago was to say, but it's not because you're going to stop you French producers or German producers, automakers are going to stop selling these cars to Europe, that you're going to stop selling them to some other parts of the world. The energy transition in Africa is taking much longer. You don't have this network of battery recharging stations. So basically he was saying, don't misunderstand that you will keep after 2040 producing oil cars. That's not going to that doesn't mean that it's going to be for the French consumer. It's going to be for the African consumers.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as you see, it's not the end from one day to one another of the oil car, whether we want it or not. That's the true reality is that some of the countries and other parts of the world are taking more time to
Of course.
transition.
Especially in this industry, you can't leapfrog, at least not for Africa. Don't you think we are like some kind of shifting our problems somewhere else?
I definitely think so. I've been working on this issue of rare metals, which is a fascinating issue for the last 10 years. And the more we get into this new post-world era, the more we realize that we need strategic, rare, critical, and even abundant metals. We need more copper, which is not rare metals, but we need 4 times as much copper in an electric car comparing to an oil car. And we discover, as we extract them more and more, new ecological issues. We discover new economic issues. How are we going to produce the batteries on our own and not depending upon gigafactories in China? We discover geopolitical issues. How are we going to secure these strategic minerals in countries with which we don't have necessarily the same values, democratic values? So we really have to consider that this is probably not a way to solve a problem, but to move it from oil fields to mining areas. And this is why we need to really be working actively on circular economy, recycling, among other things, to be less dependent as much as we can on these resources.
Very insightful, Guillaume. We could speak for longer. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Thank you for your time. It was great having this chat with you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you to all of you for attending the second edition of Movin'On Inside and for all your reactions and input on our social media networks. I would particularly like to thank our Movin'On partners who took part and offered us such great, thought-provoking insights. You can obviously watch the replay on Movin'On Connect website, and you will also find the full version of all our discussions. I look forward to seeing you very soon for the next episode of Movin'On Inside. In the meantime, stay tuned on Movin'On Connect.